She's not dead. The garbage collector stopped the billionaire's funeral, but what he revealed next. The first shovelful of soil had not yet touched the grave when a hoarse scream tore through the silence, cutting deeper than the cold wind sweeping across the cemetery. Mourners froze. Black umbrellas tilted. The priest stopped mid-breath. At the edge of the marble path, a garbage collector in a torn orange vest ran forward, waving his arms like a man chasing life itself. His voice cracked with terror and certainty as he shouted that the woman inside the coffin was not dead. In that single moment, the world of wealth, power, and carefully rehearsed grief shattered, because sometimes truth arrives from the most ignored hands, and when it does, it refuses to be buried. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that humanity can still surprise us, take a moment right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who believes in hope, and subscribe to our channel, Gentle Hearts. Your support keeps stories like this alive, stories that remind us who we really are. The funeral was meant to be flawless. Everything about it reflected money, precision, and control. The casket was imported, polished until it reflected the gray sky like a mirror of grief. The headstone already stood engraved, because in this world, even endings were scheduled in advance. The woman being buried was Elena Voss, the wife of one of the richest men in the country, a billionaire whose name was etched into skyscrapers, hospitals, and foundations. To the public, she had died suddenly after collapsing at home, her heart allegedly giving up in the quietest way possible. The newspapers called it tragic. The guests called it fate. Her husband stood rigid, eyes dry, face carved from stone, accepting condolences like transactions he no longer cared to count. But not everyone present belonged to this world of polished shoes and whispered sympathy. At the edge of the gathering stood Samuel, a municipal garbage collector whose job that morning had been to empty bins along the cemetery road. He was invisible to most of the mourners, just another working man doing his task quietly, careful not to disturb the rich in their moment of sorrow. Yet Samuel's eyes had been drawn to the coffin the moment it arrived. Something about the stillness felt wrong, not peaceful, not final. It felt interrupted, as if death itself had been rushed. Samuel was a man who lived close to the forgotten details of life. He noticed things others overlooked because his days were spent among what people threw away. He had once found a newborn kitten breathing faintly inside a discarded box and saved it. He had once discovered a homeless veteran collapsed but alive behind a dumpster and stayed until help arrived. Life had taught him that the line between dead and alive was thinner than people believed, and that assumptions killed faster than truth. As the ceremony continued, a memory clawed its way into Samuel's mind. Only days earlier, during his early morning route near the billionaire's estate, he had found a woman collapsed near the back service road. She had been pale, barely breathing, her pulse weak but present. Security guards had arrived quickly, ordering him away, telling him the situation was handled. He had protested, insisting she needed immediate medical care, but money spoke louder than concern. He had been dismissed, threatened with losing his job if he interfered. The image of that woman's face haunted him now, because it looked exactly like the woman whose coffin lay before him. The realization hit Samuel with such force that his hands began to shake. This was not coincidence. This was negligence wrapped in luxury. As the priest raised his hands to continue, Samuel did something he had never done before. He ran forward, screaming the truth, throwing dignity and fear aside. Guards rushed toward him, faces hard with irritation, ready to silence the disturbance. But something about his desperation made the crowd hesitate. Grief turned to confusion. Confusion turned to fear. The billionaire finally moved. For the first time since the ceremony began, his eyes focused on something real. He stared at Samuel not with anger, but with a flicker of doubt that cracked his perfect composure. The garbage collector spoke with breathless urgency, explaining what he had seen days earlier, how the woman had been alive, how she had needed help, how no one had listened. The words fell heavy, ugly, undeniable. The billionaire ordered the coffin opened. What followed would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. Inside the coffin, Elena's skin was cold, her lips pale, but not gray. A faint tremor moved through her chest, almost imperceptible, like the last whisper of a match refusing to die. Panic erupted. Medics were called. Orders were screamed. The billionaire dropped to his knees, his wealth useless against the raw terror flooding his body. In that moment, the truth became undeniable. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Elena was rushed to the hospital under heavy security. News outlets exploded with speculation, but no headline could capture the horror of nearly burying a living human being. Doctors worked tirelessly, discovering she had suffered a rare condition that slowed her vital signs to nearly undetectable levels, worsened by medication she had been given too quickly. She had been declared dead without enough testing, her life signed off like paperwork. As Elena lay unconscious, the billionaire faced something he had avoided his entire life: responsibility without escape. He learned that his obsession with control, speed, and image had infected even the moments that demanded patience and care. He learned that his estate staff, afraid of consequences, had chosen silence over humanity. And he learned that the only person who had truly fought for Elena's life was a man society barely noticed. Samuel's life changed overnight. He was questioned, investigated, scrutinized by lawyers and media alike. Some tried to discredit him, suggesting he wanted attention or reward. But Samuel asked for nothing. He returned to work quietly, bruised hands gripping the same trash bins, heart heavy with the thought of how close the world had come to losing a woman simply because she was convenient to mourn rather than save. Weeks later, Elena woke up. Her recovery was slow and painful, filled with confusion, anger, and grief for the life that had almost ended. When she learned the truth, when she learned that her husband had been preparing to bury her while she was still breathing, something inside her shifted forever. Gratitude toward Samuel burned brighter than fear, but it was paired with a deep reckoning. She realized that wealth had insulated her from reality, from the fragility shared by all humans regardless of status. The billionaire, confronted with the cost of his detachment, began to unravel. Guilt hollowed him. Apologies felt inadequate. He watched as Elena, once silent and accommodating, found a voice sharpened by survival. She demanded accountability, transparency, and change. Hospitals were audited. Protocols were rewritten. Staff were retrained. Lives were saved because one man refused to stay quiet. Samuel was eventually invited to the estate, a place he had only ever seen from behind gates. He stood awkwardly in clean borrowed clothes, unsure where to look. Elena thanked him not as a benefactor, but as an equal human being. She told him that his courage had returned her to the world, and that she intended to honor it. A foundation was created in his name, not for wealth, but for awareness, ensuring that medical negligence born from fear and hierarchy would be challenged wherever it appeared. Yet the greatest change was quieter. Samuel no longer felt invisible. Not because of recognition, but because he finally recognized his own worth. He understood that dignity was not assigned by titles, but earned by action. He continued his job, still collecting what others discarded, but now he did so with a deeper understanding of purpose. Every life mattered. Every voice mattered. The billionaire learned humility the hardest way possible. He learned that power without compassion was emptiness. He learned that control was an illusion, and that real strength lived in listening. His marriage survived, not because of wealth, but because of truth. Elena and her husband began anew, stripped of pretense, bound by the knowledge that love was not ownership but responsibility. The cemetery where it all began returned to its quiet routine. Grass grew back over the disturbed soil. But those who had been there would never forget the moment death was challenged and lost. They would never forget that the man who stopped a funeral wore a garbage collector's vest and carried nothing but conviction. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, please take a moment now to like this video, share it, and comment your feelings. Subscribe to Gentle Hearts, so we can continue telling stories that matter, stories that heal, stories that remind us to see one another. Special request. Before you leave, comment one line below telling us this: do you believe one brave voice can change everything? Your words may inspire someone who feels invisible today. Because sometimes, the world doesn't need another billionaire. Sometimes, it just needs someone brave enough to say, she's not dead.